So my objective here today is to talk or give you a summary of a fisheries survey that DNR completed here in 2025. My name is Jason Gostiaux. I'm a fisheries biologist for Fisheries Division out of Bay City, and I work in the Southern Lake Huron Management Unit. Mark, you suggested if I stand over against the wall there, folks online will be able to see me. Yeah. And I'll just give you the high sign to advance the slides here.
Excellent.
So like I said, the objective today is to tell you a little bit about what we found, handle some questions, and just keep the lake residents informed of what Fisheries Division is monitoring in the lake. If you'd like to advance the slide, Mark.
Okay, admitting someone?
Yep, not a problem.
All right, very good.
So today I'm going to talk about what we define as the statewide status and trends program. This is an established protocol that lays out how and what we will use to go out and sample a lake. And one thing that the status and trends program is not is a perfect way of doing one thing. It's very good at capturing a lot of different things. And so our goal is to get small fish, large fish, young fish, old fish, variety of species. And to do that, we use a variety of different gear types. The survey is completed 1 week in late spring or early summer. And that gives us a nice snapshot of the general fish community in the lake. Like I said, we use multiple gear types to catch a variety of species and size ranges. And I was here a couple of years ago, and I had summarized the last time that this was completed in Lake Fenton, and that was 2011. During that presentation, I know one of the questions was, what takes so long? Like, why haven't you been back to our lake? So at that time I had described, and I wanted to describe again, that there are over 100 lakes in our coverage area that we manage. We are able to complete between 6 and 8 of these surveys every spring, like I said, in that time frame of late spring, early summer. And so because of that rotation, it just takes years to get back to a lake to do this survey again. That doesn't mean that we're not paying attention to Lake Fenton. There is a walleye stocking program that we'll talk about a little bit. There's been some specific walleye focused survey work. But this general fish community survey is something, like I said, that it occurs every 12 to 15 years just because of our rotation. And honestly, the Southern Lake Huron Management Unit is somewhat lucky. There's management units in the state that have so many lakes that there will be fisheries biologists that do not get back to the same lake in their entire career, just because there are so many lakes and a finite amount of time and resources to do this work. Go ahead, Mark. So this is a list of the different types of gear that we use in this status and trends survey program. The bottom left of your screen, you see a typical seine. This is a smaller mesh that is used in the nearshore areas at a couple of different sites, primarily focused on young fish or small-bodied fish like minnows. On the right-hand side of your screen, the top right is a large mesh fyke net. This will have an anchor and a collecting hoops that are attached to a box and a lead. This is affixed to shore or near shore. And then the mesh size on that can catch a variety of different species. The bottom right is a trap net. It's a similar design, but it has a couple of wings on it. There's some evidence to suggest that trap nets can catch more fish or can do a better job of funneling the fish down into the collecting box. We do use some experimental gill net, and the experimental part of that term just relates to the size of the mesh. So it's a variety of sizes of gill net mesh to, again, collect a lot of different fish species and sizes. The gill net is only 125 feet long. We set a couple of those in the lake. They do kill some fish, but we certainly, our objective is not to go out to any body of water and have this survey be detrimental to the fish population. So while there was some limited mortality, it is, I guess I would say, the cost of doing business in order to get a nice snapshot. The gill net can be more effective at catching some fish that reside offshore, like walleye. And then we do spend one night, and you may have seen us out there, one night boat electrofishing around the shoreline, doing a few different transects. And again, this is a full package of gear types to try and, again, get a good snapshot of what is present in Lake Fenton. Go ahead, Mark. This right here is the list. It's a little bit cut off for the folks here with the cameras on the right-hand side. But this is the full list of fish species and length ranges that we did catch in Lake Fenton this year, 2025. Very early note to everybody is nothing that we saw out there this year in terms of the number of species or the sizes, nothing was alarming. We'll step through some of the general trends, but certainly nothing was alarming. A variety of fish species, so excellent diversity. You have different minnow species, which are providing forage for some of your game fish like walleye and northern pike. Largemouth and smallmouth bass are abundant out there. I know that I was talking earlier with some folks that Lake Fenton does receive quite a bit of bass tournament pressure. But yeah, so overall, this was our list of fish and kind of a breakdown of what we saw, different length ranges of everything that was out there. Go ahead, Mark.
Jason.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the bowfin, is that another name for dogfish?
It is, yep. So bowfin and dogfish, they're the same species. A native species that people might, I would say bowfin are not regularly targeted. Normally it's an incidental catch when people are going for different fish. Here's a breakdown of 4 different species and the associated gear type where this data came from. So I'll step through this graph so everyone understands what we're looking at. Like I said, a variety of gear types are used, but some gear types are better at catching some fish species. So for example, in the top left, we have the lake frequency of bluegill. So your x-axis are inch bins and the y-axis represents the number. And then the 2 different colored bars represent 2 different years. So with this information, we can look at what is the lake frequency from the 2011 survey to the 2025 survey when comparing the same gear type for the same species. In 2025, one of the things to note in the bottom right-hand side were walleye were caught with some frequency in 2025, whereas in 2011, in the gill net gear, there were no walleye collected in that survey, but there were some walleye collected in the survey overall. One of the things that I noted from the 2011 survey were some concerns with northern pike and northern pike growth rates. In addition to catching fish, measuring them, and identifying them, we also will collect an aging structure. Those aging structures are analyzed during winter. And so right now, all I have are lake data, but this winter we'll process the age data, and I can get with Mark and the representatives from the Lake Fenton POA. And when that final report is developed, I can distribute that to you that you can then provide to the lakefront owners. Because it will have that age and growth component that this doesn't have. And I'll talk about that again. So like I said, northern pike was one that had generated some concerns because you can see in the white bars that were in the gill net gear, no northern pike that exceeded the 24-inch minimum length limit. That was a trend that was consistent in 2011 where there were few pike that were above the legal limit. You can see in 2025, we did get some fish that were above 24 inches, the largest being upwards of 29 inches. It will be interesting to look at the growth rates for northern pike and see if there are any changes over time. Go ahead, Mark. So here's a direct comparison from that 2011 survey. One thing to note is that the 2025 survey did occur earlier in May. We were out, I think it was the first or second week of May versus the last week of May in 2011. And that can be some explanation for why we only saw, I shouldn't say only saw, we caught almost 1,000 fish in a week versus 2011, they caught over just over 2,000 fish. However, the majority of that difference is made up by 1, 2, and 3-inch bluegill. And literally that difference can come from one net and soaking for one night. So overall, the fish community was very similar. There was one net that had a hot spot for young bluegill, and that's what elevates that number. I don't look at the difference in the raw data as a problem when comparing those two values. Similar for the number of species, good variety of species. You can see 23 different species were captured in 2025. The bottom note here kind of explains some of that difference. So we had 5 forage fish present in 25. There were a few more forage species present in 2011. Most of the forage species are going to be your minnows, variety of minnows. Bluegill were consistently the most abundant panfish or fish in general in the lake, and most of the catch was comprised of panfish, walleye, bass, and northern pike. There's the difference there in the number of walleye captured. I think that'll be interesting to again look at the age and growth data for the walleye we did catch this year and relate that back to the walleye stocking program. I wanted to share the northern pike data as well. You heard me talk about it earlier with the length frequency histograms. So overall, we did catch almost double the number of northern pike in the survey this year. Again, that may be attributed to the time period. Water temperatures at the beginning of May are cooler than they are in late May, and that can be beneficial for getting some more of the cool water species like walleye and northern pike interacting with our gear. I'll finish up with northern pike, and then I want to mention again some of the timing. We not only did we catch more northern pike in 2025, right now you can't see it because of how the screen is shared, but the percent of fish that were over 24 inches was higher in 2025 as well. While we were out sampling, we did interact with some anglers. There were always people out fishing when we were out doing our survey. And at that time, there were a few folks targeting panfish, and they were sharing their observations and sharing the lack of panfish that they were catching. I think that was a function of the cool water temps and the time of year. Like I said, overall in the survey, I didn't see anything that was alarming. There were a variety of panfish, a variety of sizes, and adequate sizes of panfish for people to harvest as well. Go ahead, Mark. So the next steps with this data, like I said, we've got the species that were present, the length frequency of those species, and the number. We collect aging structures from game fish, and now this winter, our technical staff will go through and interpret those aging structures. So we use scales and dorsal fin spines. Those structures have rings on them like a tree, and you can count those rings, relate that to the age of the fish, and look at growth rates. We're able to compare the growth rates of the fish in Lake Fenton to statewide averages, determine if there's any stunting or on the flip side of that, actually exceptional growth at times. One of the specific pieces of growth information that I'll look at is for northern pike to see if those growth rates have improved. I know that in the 2011 survey, northern pike were growing well below the state average, and in that survey report, the biologist had entertained recommending different northern pike harvest regulations for Lake Fenton. So we'll see what comes from the growth data in 2025. Another interesting component will be the walleye ages from the fish that we captured and seeing if they correspond to stocked years. And this helps us evaluate the stocking program. You may have heard me say that it takes several years before we get back and do a full-scale fish community survey. But in the meantime, we have done a couple of fall nighttime electrofishing surveys for walleye, and specifically for young walleye in years that we've stocked fish. We've seen some positive trends in that data. So we've stocked fish in the spring, and we see them show up in the fall. This is another way to look at, do the walleye that we catch correspond to those stocked years? There's not much evidence for natural walleye reproduction in Lake Fenton. It's typically a put, grow, and take fishery, which is an acceptable objective. But being able to look at the age of the walleye and correlate that to the stocked years is just a nice stocking evaluation.
Why?
Why do we not have natural reproduction? So I'll entertain that question. We can circle back to it at the end if we want to continue it on. So one thing that fisheries managers have learned through time is that it's much harder to convince walleye to spawn in a lake that they were never naturally there than it is for walleye that are wild to a lake system. So even though Lake Fenton, large body of water, adequate depth, temperature, summer thermal habitat with cool temps, expansive sandy shoals, walleye are stocked there to create a fishery. And even though they've been stocked there for a number of years, they are not able to sustain themselves through natural reproduction. Again, it's not a negative, it's not a fault of the lake. Like I said, the objective can be a put, grow, and take fishery. It just seems like even in systems like I would consider Lake Fenton to be reasonably good walleye habitat for the reasons I've listed, and they just don't take hold there. And it's surprising because there are lakes where walleye are do not rely on stocking, and they've been there, for decades. And the lake doesn't have the same, what I would call good characteristics that Lake Fenton has, but Mother Nature is better at doing it than we are. And like I said, we can come back to that at the end for more questions. Next slide, please. That was a good segue though, Mark, for the next slide here. So walleye have been consistently stocked in Lake Fenton for over 30 years. And like I said, in that time, we've done some walleye specific surveying effort, and it often the fish that we capture are paired back to those stocked years, like I mentioned. The current stocking prescription calls for 50 fish per acre, so that comes out to just over 42,000 spring fingerling walleye, and we are aiming to stock those every other year. And we stock walleye in alternate years because in this example, with a lake that has no natural reproduction, you compare that to a wild walleye population, every year doesn't pull off a spectacular year class. There's cycles. So by doing that every other year planting, we're allowing those fish that are stocked this year in 2025 to not have as much competition in 2026 by having another stocked year class. Gives them a break and allows them to survive. In this breakdown for the table, I wanted to show not only the number of fish, but also the number per pound. And so to think about the number per pound, I try to come up with some analogies to explain what that means, because in the last few years since 2021, we have intentionally focused on stocking a heavier product. So what that means is if you had golf balls in your hand and it took you, bear with me on the analogy, 370 golf balls to make a pound. But then you had another example where it was 1,500 golf balls to make a pound. Those golf balls are different sizes. And so our assumption is that if you can stock your spring fingerling walleye at the heaviest that you can grow them before you have to drain the pond, you give them a better chance for survival. So I was hired in January of 2020. And when I looked back at some of the walleye stocking data for not only Lake Fenton, but other systems, I saw some of the patterns like we see here in the 20 teens, where you had maybe a higher number of fish stocked during a time when the prescription called for more, but the size of those fish was much, much smaller. And if there's issues with walleye survival, it could be attributed to the stocked product. And so we're intentionally trying to give Lake Fenton the best chance to sustain a walleye fishery for any. Last thing before I get to open it up for questions, I mentioned altering our walleye stocking program. It's not to say that it was failing in Lake Fenton, but the data that I saw from the previous regime was infrequent, and it didn't always have great survival of those stocked fish. So we're taking a little bit more of an intentional look at the stock product that we're putting in the lake and some follow-up stocking evaluations. Because those are resources that the state provides, and we want them to be put into places that they're going to survive and provide a benefit to anglers. So that's the summary that I have for Lake Fenton. Mark, you can go to the last slide. It's just a question slide, but I wanted to point out on the right-hand side, that was one of our summer seasonal technicians, Gerald. He's a student at Lake Superior State, worked with us for the summer, and he's holding a smallmouth bass that we caught it was either a fight net or a trap net. I know it was not a gill net. And I think it may have been set off the island, but I can't remember. We had some nice smallmouth, and I think that one was about 19 inches long. So just a highlight of the fish survey that we had. So yeah, I'd like to open it for a few minutes to questions that folks in the room or online may have. And I can leave a card with Mark. I know he has my contact information, so if there's an opportunity to follow up, we'll let you get to your business agenda, but we'll have some time for questions right now.
I saw a report from a previous study that suggested that the growth rate is quite slow on bass as well. And your capture data there showed nothing over 15 inches on largemouths. Any thoughts on why that is? Because I fish out here a lot.
Sure.
And it's really tough to get a bass over 15 inches. So
Yeah,
but I'm out there, 2-3 days a week, and I'm seeing exactly what your netting
Yeah.
survey shows. Very few over 15 inches. I'm just wondering if there's some reasons why, and if maybe we're like over treating the weeds.
yeah. So like you said, in our graph, we had in that particular gear type, that was the most bass that we captured, and we had one larger, but it was cut off on the side. But like you said, not abundant number of bass over 15 inches. I think that could be due to a couple of things. Lake Fenton, as you know, has a narrow littoral zone. So the area out to 10 feet deep. There are some very steep drop-offs. They're pretty spectacular to see on the fish finder. But largemouth are normally going to be in shallow, warm, vegetated habitat. Lake Fenton is a large lake, and it has some offshore shoals and vegetated areas. There may not be as much preferred habitat for largemouth bass to support a large population that are going to grow to older ages. I don't have the age data memorized from 2011 to see how long bass were persisting in the system, but we can compare that to 2025 and see, are they reaching ages of only 5 years old, or are they reaching ages of 10 years old? The weed management strategy could be reviewed. I know that I've reviewed the permit applications for that and talked with the applicators a bit. It's a hard balance beam to walk when you have a variety of values and objectives for the weed management strategy. Some folks, are going to lean more towards an aggressive weed treatment to try and reduce the number of weeds for recreational boating, whereas another group of lake users may want to promote more weed growth for fishing opportunities. So trying to balance that. Like I said, Lake Fenton having some pretty open water, deep basins is not real conducive to largemouth. Like I said, the forage fish diversity and abundance seems appropriate. But again, it's just, each lake is somewhat unique. Lake Fenton may just not have the perfect recipe or formula to generate 18, 20, 22 inch bass, regularly. We saw a few examples, but they weren't abundant.
Jason?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll take one online and then one in the room.
Okay, this is George, and back in 2011, I think Joe Leonardi did this survey for us and came in and gave us the presentation. I know the one thing that struck my mind, I saw a 48-inch gar pike in the list back then. I see the longest one, I think, was 34 in your capture this year. However, a totally different subject. In the areas of the lake since 2011, there's been a large abundance growth in Lake Cranes Cove, or population of carp fish. I used to see a lot more fishermen out in front of my house catching walleye and even northern pike. Is the carp population any detrimental to other appropriate, more game fish? And if so, is there anything that the lake can do to eliminate the, whatever you want to call those kind of fish, of carp, that become a very abundant growth in certain areas?
So we did see some carp in our survey. You are correct, George. It didn't seem like in our survey carp were overabundant. However, I know that often lake associations are concerned with abundant carp populations and if they're a detriment to the lake ecosystem. Lake Fenton is a clear lake. In areas where we see abundant carp populations are areas like Holloway and Mott Reservoir. The impounded waters have exceptionally high carp abundance. Carp feeding behavior. Carp feeding behavior is interesting because they're rooting around in the substrate of the lake, and that can disturb sediments and can lead to turbid water. We didn't see that in Lake Fenton. I actually was I like coming down to Lake Fenton and seeing how clear the water is. In terms of strategies that the Lake Association can take on, there are a couple of examples where lake associations promote bow fishing tournaments. Bow fishing anglers are often targeting common carp. There's other species as well that they're able to harvest, but their focus is on common carp. You could entertain hosting a bow fishing tournament to focus on carp removal. There's not really a mechanism that the state has or fish division has to remove carp species when a lake association feels that they're at a detriment. We're monitoring it, but even in a system, let's say we were dealing with a small 20-acre lake, no development around the shoreline and just inundated with carp. Unfortunately, we would look at that and say, this is the status of carp in this lake. We don't really have a method to go in and effectively remove those or efficiently remove those.
Jason, I've got a question for you. Any thoughts on wake boats and what they're doing to the environment? And we had all looked at a video of how it's, in some cases, it scours the bottom. It looks like the moon after they're done going. And my own observation seems to be that those types of boats are increasing, not decreasing. And so, and then what you were just saying about that 10-foot water losing habitat for fish growth, it seems to coincide, but what are your thoughts on that?
There's been quite a bit of work looking at wake boats, and there was actually a Fisheries Division report where they reviewed a variety of states and regulations and then tied increased wave activity and energy from waves and what that does to the bottom of the lake. I can share that report. Right now, there are no specific rules or laws against wake boat operation. There are rules and laws about boat operation in general with regard to how close you are to another boat and how close you are to shore, but nothing specific for wake boats. That report does have recommendations, but for example, at Lake Fenton, it would be, essentially best management practices and informing the Lake Fenton owners, but I know that there's the public boat launch. It's increasing the knowledge of what wake boats can do when they're operated in a manner too close to shore. But right now, there's no laws that would prevent that. So that report does a nice job of synthesizing information, providing recommendations, and then describing how lakefront owners or lakefront property owners can utilize that information. Essentially, in order to get laws changed or laws enacted or passed, it would come down to contacting representatives and voicing those concerns. Yeah. I think there was, a couple questions in the book.
You may have commented on this, I got here a little late. Can you speculate what appears to be quite a drastic decline in the perch population? And how would you rate the overall health of the lake in regards to fish habitat?
Sure. So I would have to go back. I don't remember the exact numbers that we had caught for yellow perch and how that relates to 2011. Yellow perch across the Midwest in Great Lakes and inland lakes seem to be having some issues with recruitment. And the year classes that they're producing currently are not doing as well as they were historically. Whether that is a function of fewer nutrients, whether that is a function of less spawning habitat. So yellow perch spawn on aquatic vegetation. They don't build nests like a bass or a bluegill. They don't provide any parental care around the nest. So aggressive weed treatment strategies, removing or killing off aquatic vegetation could result in less spawning habitat for yellow perch. Many years of that, and you could see population effects from it. In terms of, you said the overall fish health, or I'm sorry, the health of fish habitat in Lake Fenton. I know that it's got quite a bit of sand in that littoral zone. There's some aquatic vegetation present. I know that there's some invasive species present out there as well. I know Eurasian water milfoil is one that, when left untreated, can cause big issues when it gets so thick and tops out, and that can limit, recreational boating and fishing, and also native species, native plant species diversity. One of the things that I had spoke about the last time I was here was a little bit about shoreline modifications. And since then, I've had some conversations with Mark. I admit the conversations, although we're passionate about them, the progress is slow to move along. But anyway, our conversation was focused on the amount of hard shoreline. So that would be seawalls and the lack of natural shoreline. I heard you talk earlier about some goose issues around the public beach and how you can utilize vegetation to prevent them from coming up on your property. When I go around Lake Fenton, one thing that I don't see very many of are down trees. You don't see woody habitat. You see some wooden dock posts, but you don't see trees. And I think that if some folks on Lake Fenton could adopt the approach of utilizing down trees along their lakefront and try to get some momentum to make that a popular idea, I think you would see improvements at the bottom end of the food web with macroinvertebrates, small insects, forage fish species like minnows, and that would cascade up through the food web. So that would be my desire. If I could, wave a magic wand, I would incorporate some soft shoreline around Lake Fenton, some natural shoreline with aquatic plants, native aquatic plants, and increase the amount of woody structure that's present in the near shore areas.
I'm just going to make a point here, Jason, just so everybody in the audience knows, we don't spray for weeds. We spray for invasive species. And I think you can describe the difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then we'll get to your question, Mark. So treating for invasive plant species like Eurasian water milfoil is a challenge because it's so adaptable and outcompetes native plant species very well. And so having that weed management strategy focusing on invasive species is different than just completely eradicating all aquatic plants. I hope that helps. Just 1 minute, George. We've had his hand up for a little while in the room, then we'll go back to you.
I'm curious, we have a huge population of round gobies, and when you did your surveying, I didn't see any mention of round gobies, and people were here mentioning about the Lake Fenton size of their game fish. I'm Mark Schatz. I kind of barged into your association. I apologize. I'm the president of Pennsylvania Upper Lake Association. Our fish population actually is growing. The bass are getting bigger. The walleye we're catching are in their 20s. Perch have returned to the lake. But what is also happening is our round goby population is literally exploding. And our belief is that's what's caused the fish size to increase. Now it has to be verified if you guys do a survey in 2 years, but that's just food for thought because I didn't see any round goby in any of your surveying.
Correct. We did not catch any round goby. I don't believe any were caught in 2011, but I'd have to check back. So round goby present an interesting scenario. like you said, Mark, they are an invasive species. They are an egg predator. They can be detrimental to fish during the egg stage, obviously. One thing that's interesting is let's take a smallmouth bass, for example. If a smallmouth bass egg is able to hatch into a larval fish and grow to become a juvenile smallmouth bass or an adult smallmouth bass, they turn around and eat round gobies like vitamins. And so it's an interesting interaction between invasive round gobies and native game fish, where they can be detrimental to the egg stage, but it's hard to say a benefit, but we'll call it they're detrimental at the egg stage, but provide a forage item at the adult stage. So I will say I would not recommend introducing round goby to Lake Fenton as a forage species, but there are examples where an invasive species like that provides another forage fish. And Lake Panema may very well be, benefiting on some regards and not benefiting them in others. George, did you have another question on?
Well, I was just gonna kind of build on what Mark said and maybe somebody else said about the weed treatments that we're doing. Not only are they only for invasive weeds, all of the chemicals, of course, are approved by the EPA, and I assume the DNR gets their big say in that. It's not intended to get into the shallower waters. We've switched our weed treatment programs years ago, 10 plus years ago, from doing more individual property owners things that came right up close to shore or within 3 or 4 feet of water, to more concentrating on the lake, on the deeper water from the 10 to 15 feet range, where some are more prevalent, like Eurasian water milfoils. So I think when we say stuff about, well, we're taking out the weeds and stuff, we should be careful, because what we did just like this year when we did the full lake-wide treatment, what we see is, man, the native weeds comes exploding back in the next year, and they'll grow right back in as quick as they can. But then the other ones start to take over again in a 5-year cycle, as you know, probably don't, Jason. And that's why we've been working on a 5-year cycle with major lake-wide treatment to get the Eurasian water and other invasive ones out hard, and then just play a 4-year program of just trying to maintain what we gained in the big thing every 5 years.
Yeah, that's correct, George. It's Eurasian water milfoil is a difficult one. It's an ongoing process, like you described, where it takes a year of intensive treatment to try and bolster the native plant community. And in a perfect world, the native plants would outcompete the Eurasian water milfoil, in that 4-year window. And it just doesn't always, happen exactly how you'd hope. And so you're right. There are some caveats to the weed treatment program that we wouldn't want to paint a broad brush on whether it's all good or all bad.
Kurt,
Sure.
does the findings from your surveys get into the stocking? Because not that we don't appreciate the walleye stocking, that's great. But helping the largemouth, the smallmouth, the crappie, the perch, I can go years ago, and George would probably be in a better position to comment. We used to have stocking of more than just walleye.
So the state of Michigan right now, we raise walleye, muskie, salmon, and trout. And so it limits what species we can stock. So I think that there may have been different fish production products that were in play years ago, or was it a combination of state-sponsored stocking as well as some private stocking? I'm not sure. I'd have to look back into the data to see. But that could be part of the explanation for why we may have stocked more species historically, and currently we only stock one. So right now we don't have a source for yellow perch or northern pike. Those are the species that we raise, and those are the species that we have to choose from.
Are there private sources for those that are considered reputable?
Yeah, there are. And that's another thing, Mark, that I can share. There's a private fish stocking permit for public waters. And so we often see that we're obviously not able to stock every lake with walleye where people want walleye stock. And so oftentimes there are lake associations that will go and raise funds and do some stocking efforts on them. Yeah. I think, was there a question in the, yeah, in the back?
Cause the weather, winter, the last 3 or 4 years, I don't even think the lake grows for fishing.
Last year, it was-
I mean,
last year, we had a lot of ice last. year.
well, not that much.
Well,
We've been riding on, but the years before that, we haven't had ice in at least 3 years.
Yeah, weather certainly plays a part in fish populations. Speaking about walleye specifically, and with some experience I have on the Great Lakes, there's some correlation between good ice years and good walleye hatch. On smaller inland lakes like this, I know that the weather does play a part in regulating fish communities. Knowing the exact details or links between what does a good ice year produce on Lake Fenton. I'm not sure exactly, but all of those weather components obviously affect the fish. And for years, there can be population level changes. We talked earlier about yellow perch. Yellow perch are a cool water species that spawn in spring, like you said, on vegetation. They need different habitat than, say, a largemouth bass, which is a warm water species. We talked about it being in more shallow, warm vegetated water. Go ahead. Sorry, guys.
We're putting in a new seedling that's required, and we've had 3 estimates of different companies come out to give us an estimate, and all 3 were strongly promoting the rocks for the ability for fish to reproduce and a much more natural environment, basically for fish. They kept saying, and they all 3 were really, really strongly pushing for it.
There are 3, let's call them 3 shoreline modification options generally to mitigate erosion. One of those is seawall. That would be, from my perspective, the least preferred. The next would be rock riprap, which would be a moderate option that is better for the environment than seawall. And then the third would be a fully natural, vegetated, bioengineered shoreline.
That's what we really recommend.
Yep. So
What you're going for.
tried, or I shouldn't say tried, currently working with Mark and continuing to work with Mark to try and get an example to showcase on Lake Fenton. It's just been fish biologists in Michigan have a lot on their plate. One of the things that you all are recognizing, because I talked to you about how long it takes to get back to a lake and do a survey. When you compare our coverage area to other biologists across the nation, we are near the top in terms of surface acres of water per biologist. And so oftentimes it's hard to address everything you want at each individual lake. And so I apologize. Like I said, that's what has led to some delays with Mark's idea and project at his property to have a small installation of a down tree and just showcase that and show how that changes through time, how that can trap sediment, how that can promote native vegetation growth. Doing some work with U of M Flint in monitoring that site for changes in the fish community right directly in front of your property. I hope to see that through to fruition. It just takes time. And like I said, if I could be an individual lake biologist for Lake Fenton, I would sign up for that. Unfortunately, that's not in the cards right now. But sir, you had your hand up a couple of times and I skipped over.
All right, yeah, I had like 2 points on the walleye. Doesn't that require flowing water to reproduce? And then let's ask this real quick. You mentioned having a bowfin dogfish tournament. Is the pike an equally aggressive predator? Because it looked like from your data we had quite an increase in the number and size of pike.
Yep, so your first question was about walleye spawning. So walleye, they are not required to have flowing water. Oftentimes we think of walleye maybe migrating out of a lake up into a river to spawn. The eggs of walleye get their or grow from dissolved oxygen going over them. And that doesn't have to happen in a river. So they spawn near shore or in shallower water. and the wave energy is bringing in fresh, well-oxygenated water, and that's how they are able to survive. So it's not a necessary requirement in order to promote natural walleye reproduction.
Okay.
There are examples in the lakes where walleye are able to sustain themselves naturally. And then your second question was about the bow fishing. So couple of things, like I said, a bow fishing tournament with an emphasis on common carp is one option. And I specifically point out common carp because they are a non-native introduced species. Bowfin or dogfish and gar that we know are in Lake Fenton. Sometimes those do get harvested during those bow fishing tournaments. I am more of a proponent of harvesting common carp, not necessarily the native species like gar and bowfin. And then you mentioned northern pike. They are a top predator, certainly are consuming, not only just forage fish, but young panfish and even young walleye. That's, everything that can fit in its mouth, it's probably going to make an attempt at. And so you were just commenting on, northern pike are a top predator and could increase in their numbers. Are we going to see maybe an imbalance in predator and prey? I think that the native predators, and I'll even group walleye into that as a native predator, although maybe not native to Lake Fenton, native to Michigan. Native predators and prey balance themselves out oftentimes naturally. When you get something like common carp in there, there's a non-native species that can throw things out of balance. And so maybe some attempts to specifically focus on that could be something that you entertain.
Thank you.
Yep. One more question, either online or in the room, and then we can let you guys get on with your important business.
Just a quick question, it's not about the fish.
Sure. Oh, it's not about the fish? Next question.
At the launch, reading through the rules. Rule number 2 talks about this lake being a anchorless lake. Can you explain what an anchorless lake is?
I think that could be a township ordinance, not necessarily a state law. I'll have to make a note about that and look into it because that is not something that I'm familiar with. And so that's why I think it could be a township ordinance. So I don't know what exactly that means, an anchorless lake.
Yes.
I would assume it has something to do with where you can or cannot anchor your boat. But I'd have to look more deeply into that because I'm unfamiliar with that rule or regulation. So I suspect it could be a local township ordinance.
It is. We have no anchor zones. I don't think it's the entire lake, but we have no anchor zones on the lake. George, do you want to speak to that?
Well, yeah, there's just a small one. It is a township ordinance, and it was put in many, many years ago, and it only involves a certain section along the, let me think here, along the east shore of the lake, just out from a couple points of off the lake to the island corner, and that's it.
Yeah. At one time, over the west side where the fireworks are.
Yeah.
It's actually called the sunken sandbar or something. You could walk almost to the island right through there. And that was a huge anchor zone, bigger than Pig Beach. And so they cut that out. They made that a no anchor zone. And I believe in the shallows and the narrows where you go through to get from this side of the lake over to the marina, I think that's also a no anchor zone.
I would throw one quick question, or not question, back to Jason about his thing. I was really surprised about you talking about like putting logs into the lake. I have 2 or 3 logs out in front of my house, and I can see them in the clear water from the end of my dock. And it's amazing how the fish, either big pike or even bass, lay down along the side of those logs in the water. And if it's funny, I know like some of the lakes, Hubbard Lake and that, they used to put all kinds of Christmas trees and stuff in cages and then put them with rocks and drop with stones and put them in the lake. I don't know if that's an approved thing with DNR, but I know, boy, that seems to have caused a lot of areas of growth. Even Platte Lake did the same kind of a thing with capturing little shrubbery stuff and burying it and dropping it off into the 8-10 foot water stages.
Yeah, there are different options. one of the things that, you know, both DNR Fisheries Division as well as Eagle, the regulatory authority, is conscious about is not introducing new navigational hazards, so maintaining a certain depth of water over top of any structure. But one way to mitigate that is to anchor that off to shore and have that interaction between the land and water. And like I said, I think you would see improvements at all levels of the food web with some additions of woody structure, and maybe like we were saying earlier, Mark, we can have a case study right out in front of your place. I think that would be really interesting to do, and I know that U of M Flint is on board, so we'll try to continue that conversation and have a showcase piece. So I do want to say thank you for inviting me to present again. Like I mentioned, we're not completely done with our data for this survey, so when I do get the final report put together with some of the age and growth, I'll give that to Mark and he can distribute it to everyone. And he also has my contact info, so any follow-up questions or comments, don't hesitate to reach out and we'll keep the conversation going. I like interacting with the folks that are, you know, call home the places that I get to visit once every 15 years.